Thank you very much indeed for the invitation. It's a great pleasure for me to share with you our new initiative on the international level and the increase in cooperation in order to try and deliver quicker, safe and effective medicines for rare diseases patients. So I don't think that this comes as a surprise for you. You are in the field experts, so you very well know what are the challenges of the field. There is a huge unmet medical need in that field where diagnosis is often delayed for a huge number of diseases, as Sharon already stressed. And most of these diseases remain without any specific treatment, which is really a really huge problem in the area. So the resources are very scattered. The patients are very few and scattered all over Europe or the world in some cases. So there is a big challenge in collecting sufficient data and samples and patients for clinical trials. And the usual models that are used to develop drugs for common diseases do not work for rare disease, or at least in most of the cases. So we need to think in different ways. As already mentioned, the resources are very scattered, be it the patients, of course, but also the expertise. The clinicians are very few, specialized in a given disease. And as everybody knows, the budgets dedicated to research or development for rare diseases and orphan drug is also very low, or at least too low in view of the medical needs. So, bearing that in mind, there was a discussion already more than 1 year ago between our director, Dr. Ruxandra Draghia-Akli, and the director of the National Institutes for Health in the US in Washington, Dr. Francis Collins, who started to discuss that actually something should be done to try and accelerate research in that field. Because improving coordination of what is already being done in both sides of the Atlantic would certainly help accelerating the delivery of new diagnostics and therapies. Also, they reflected on the fact that we should increase the research volume dedicated to rare diseases and to try and better connect rare diseases research, not only in Europe or in the US, but globally, so over the Atlantic and actually internationally, not limited to these two countries. And then there was a recognition that there is a lot of more basic research on pathophysiology, for instance, and new techniques, omics, etc. But that actually this new knowledge should be translated more into preclinical and clinical research, so as to really have applications of all this new knowledge towards then diagnostics and therapies and potentially in some cases even cures of diseases. Of course, this would certainly benefit the field as these treatments and diagnostics are universal, so that would mean an economy of scale. And having that economy of scale, this would liberate resources that could then be reallocated to diseases or orphan drugs that are less investigated. And this would also enable to set and faster reach ambitious goals, overall goals. Also, pooling these resources together would allow achieving more rapidly the critical mass of expertise needed to produce the necessary knowledge. And that's how actually this idea to create an international rare diseases research consortium was born. So there were a few workshops which were held already, as mentioned by Sharon previously, to investigate what could be done in the field. And it's actually very timely that such a reflection is being conducted, because it's true that if you take all the programs, the research programs that are actually running over the globe, they look generally very similar. So we absolutely need to try and avoid to have duplication in what we do, because that would definitely be a waste of resources. And rather than duplication, we should try to foster synergies and complementarities between our research programs. Also, something that has already been mentioned is that there is a movement in the last decades concerning genomics, and all these omics technologies have allowed to collect a huge number of data, and it's time now that these more basic data are taken into consideration into a more clinical view, and to try to prove their clinical utility, and that might lead even to a redefinition of diseases as we see them, so not only on the clinical definition, but maybe on their molecular definition. Actually, this links also to what was mentioned by Andrea in his introduction, that the European Commission has rethought the place of rare diseases and taken them into account in the personalized medicine approaches. And it is true that nowadays we are more and more speaking of personalized treatments for patients, and this is certainly something which is very true for rare diseases, where there are so few patients that actually treatment for a given individual is extremely personalized and specific to that person. So that's why actually this reconsideration of the place of rare diseases was taken at the level of our directorate. And also what we have seen, and Sharon mentioned that as well, there is a huge number of orphan designation, but overall globally we have some 300 orphan drugs on the market, a little bit more than 60 in Europe actually. So there is a huge gap between the moment where the medical plausibility of an orphan drug is proven and the time when it reaches the market. So there is a need to push this designation forward to preclinical and clinical development. So this is really certainly a good time to think how to more cooperate on a global level. You heard already that the goals, the overall aims of the consortium are to develop 200 new therapies by 2020, and also to deliver means to diagnose most rare diseases by the same time. How were these overall goals set up? Actually, we thought if it's business as usual by 2020, so in 10 years, sorry, we will have some 150 new therapies on the market without doing anything. So here, we don't want to do business as usual. We really want to rethink the way we are working globally in research, and that's why we chose that 200 new therapies would really be appropriate and ambitious for this consortium. And also taking into account that most of these rare diseases are genetics, and with the new sequencing technologies, this should give the scientific community means to diagnose most of these rare diseases. Of course, the consortium does not exclude those diseases which are not genetically based, and they will be investigated as well in the consortium. During the first workshop that was held between NIH and European experts in Reykjavik 1 year ago, there was a reflection conducted in what would be the areas in need for more cooperation and the ways how to foster that. And here on that slide you have the various areas that would certainly mostly benefit from such a cooperation. And first of all, there was recognition that data and biosample should be more standardized and collected in a standardized and harmonized way and validated way, so that they can be shared at a global level. And indeed that would certainly help reach quicker this critical mass of resources needed to provide statistically relevant results. So there was a reflection around patient registries and biobanks, and how could a knowledge, so-called knowledge management system, be established at a global level to increase the sharing of these data and samples. Also, something that is deemed very important is the molecular and the clinical characterization of these diseases, and this is absolutely mandatory. If you better know your enemy, then you can fight it in a more appropriate way. There comes also the question of classification and nomenclature of rare diseases, because it's true that there are different types of nomenclatures which are being used nowadays, and actually experts could well speak with other words of things which are actually the same, and they need to recognize that, and this is very important because we need all to speak the same language in order to pool the resources. Natural history, the same thing. You very well know that you need to know the baseline level and how the disease is behaving in order to know whether your drug is working effectively. And also to define, of course, good outcome measures for the drug. Ontologies of rare diseases and also the cross-referencing to the ontologies in animals was also one of the hot topics that was debated previously, and that will be given attention. Translational and preclinical research. We had industrial experts engaged from the very beginning of the reflection that we conducted on this consortium, and there was a clear message that having a validated model is not an easy task, and there such a consortium would certainly help in this. And of course, if we are to develop 200 new therapies by 2020, clinical research will certainly be a big part of that consortium, with attention being given to validated biomarkers and surrogate endpoints. New diagnostics also will be taken into account, and the repurposing of drug was a topic that was reflected upon, because we thought that for those drugs which are already on the market for another indication, the safety profile is already known. So there we could go quicker and repurpose them for another indication, and we would probably save a lot of work in the safety aspects there. So we will also consider supporting research in this area. So in a consortium that will work on a global level, we need to define our ways of working and the global policies that will be followed by everybody. And there are actually already working groups which are working to develop those policies. And the policies are actually, if you have identified a priority that you want to work on and to dedicate money to, how will you do that on a global level? So the policy is not what you want to do, but how you will do it. And what will be followed, the general principles that will be followed by everybody in order to reach the goals. So currently these policies are being developed by the working groups that have been set up around the various aspects that you see here, and these policies will become mandatory for the whole consortium to follow. I think that one general policy which is very important is that there is a commitment of the whole consortium for rapid data release to the scientific community, so that the results can also be used outside the consortium for additional research. So how will this consortium work? As already mentioned by Sharon, the funding agencies will be entitled to participate in the executive committee are those who are dedicating at least $10 million over 5 years, starting from the 1st of January 2010. So anybody, any organization who funds rare diseases research to that level will be given a place in the executive committee of the consortium. We are also reflecting on a way to include smaller players, because we recognize that maybe not every funding body will be able to put that money on the table, and there will be a mechanism for groupings of funding bodies to participate as well. So everybody, every funding agency, funding body will follow their own ways of supporting research. So we will not have particular, or at least at the beginning, particular calls for proposals issued by the consortium per se, but every funding agency will issue their own calls for proposals or support research the way they are using to support research. Because it will be quicker, actually, to operate like this than to try and agree on a way that would be followed by the consortium. We will start much more quicker if everybody continues their ways of funding. And then, of course, everybody will need to implement the framework of IRDiRC policies and guidelines that are being currently developed. As already said, the funders will seek the complementarities and synergies between their research funding programs, and this will certainly allow to lower the duplication that is probably currently the case between the various regions. And the scientists of the funded projects will then be networked in working group, who will then produce the guidelines and the various results and best practices in their own areas. This is a slide on how we envisage the progress of the consortium, and there will be a close monitoring of these. So there is a part on diagnostics and another one on therapies. Bearing in mind the 200 new therapies and the means to diagnose most rare diseases by 2020. So by end of next year, in the part of diagnostics, we envisage to conduct a mapping of the sequencing and the characterization of rare diseases, which is already currently ongoing. And from this mapping exercise, to try and identify the gaps and to prioritize them for further sequencing and development of diagnostics. By 2015, we should have 5,000 of rare diseases sequenced and or characterized, and 3,000 means to diagnose, or 3,000 diseases being potential. That could be diagnosed through these new diagnostics methods. And by 2020, most of them should become diagnosable. In the therapies area, we will conduct the same exercise of identification of gaps that will be probably much easier because most of the diseases have no specific therapies, but the difficulty there will be to prioritize these gaps, and we will issue a list of 100 therapies that could be developed in priority by the consortium. And these being new or repurposed therapies, as already mentioned. By 2015, there should be 50 new applications for marketing authorizations, either for new or repurposed therapies, and by 2020, we should have those 200 new MA given for new or repurposed therapies. This is the structure of the consortium, and it is a 3 layers consortium. So the executive committee is actually composed by the funding agencies with minimal investment, as already explained. So we will have 1 representative per funding body, 1 representative per grouping of funding bodies, and also the chairs of the various scientific committees. We will have 3 scientific committees, 2 focused on the main goals of sequencing and characterization of rare diseases for diagnostic purposes, and 1 on therapies, and a 3rd scientific committee dedicated to all these so-called horizontal issues that are the classification, nomenclature, natural history, ontologies, information aspects from the consortium. There, these scientific committees will be composed of 15 members, with balanced representation from patients, industry, scientists, etc. And then we will have the actual networking and cooperation activities performed by the working groups that will be set up around the various areas already identified, like sequencing, model systems, biomarkers, etc. And it's not limitative, so in case there is a new working group identified that would be necessary to set up, this will be done, and it's a very flexible organization. So what are the roles of these different groups? The executive committee is, of course, the overall representation of the consortium, and it will adopt the policies and the guidelines for the global, the whole consortium, will coordinate their research funding programs, and decide on the composition of the scientific committees. The scientific committee, so the three ones on diagnostics, therapies, and horizontal activities, will then propose the research prioritization for the setting up of the program by the executive committee. They will assess the progress made in the various working groups, and they will also agree on the standards that are being developed by the various working groups. And the working groups, as already mentioned, is the layer where the real cooperation will take place. So these will be the representatives of funded projects sitting in these working groups, and they will ensure these synergies between the various programs, and they will develop and propose the standards supporting and enabling the research in their own field of research. The next steps for the consortium are as follows. We have currently open call for nominations in the scientific committees, and you have until the 15th of December to propose your representatives. The decision on the composition of the scientific committees will be taken by the executive committee in a meeting that will be held in January. Also, the working groups are being composed, and the various funding agencies are currently identifying those projects that are already running since January 2010 to ask these projects whether they would like to sit in one or other working groups of the consortium. As actually this initiative was set up after their project was selected for support by the various funding agencies. The policy document is currently being not only developed but also revised, because we have had already an incredible amount of work done by these the people who have worked so far on the various policies proposed. So the idea is that this policy document is also adopted in the meeting, the January meeting, by the executive committee. During that meeting, a decision will also be made concerning the next meeting of the scientific committees and the executive committees. So we will have an agenda for the next meetings. More information on this initiative you can find at the following website, and notably there is the template for applying in the executive committee if you are a funding body, and of course industries are very welcome to participate in this initiative. So in case you invest the minimal amount of money, then you are fully entitled to participate. And also there is the template for nomination of representatives in the scientific committees. So there we call for representation of organizations and associations in various areas, so professional organizations of clinicians or more basic researchers, but also of patients and industry representatives. So there as well you have until the 15th of December to mobilize your organization to nominate people to sit in these scientific committees. And we invite each organization to nominate one representative for one of the three scientific committees. So you have to choose for which one your expertise would most fit. We have 15 members per scientific committee, but as this is a global initiative, we need to keep it at a manageable level of people there, so we cannot accept nominations and elections in each one of these scientific committees. Otherwise, we will end up with committees that are much too large to be efficient, actually. I would like to finish my presentation by stressing that we have actually already a number of initiatives ongoing in Europe, and I thank Ségolène and her team for having provided us with these figures. As you see, we have in Europe more than 4,000 research projects already ongoing in all areas of rare diseases research, and this initiative will probably help streamlining and avoiding the duplication in all these projects, and we really look forward putting all that into music through our consortium. This is the same exercise that was conducted by Orphan concerning clinical research, and there is a number of clinical trials already ongoing in Europe that would certainly benefit from such an initiative at global level as well. These are the figures that we have for the European Union, and we have been supporting research on rare disease for decades already now. For the moment, in the 7th Framework Programme for Research, we are supporting some 65 projects for more than 300 million euros. In various areas, so we focus FP7 on pathophysiology and natural history, but also on the development of diagnostics, therapies and preventive activities wherever possible, with the development of models, registries, biobanks, identification of biomarkers, but also preclinical research and clinical research in various areas, pharmacological approaches, but also advanced therapies, proteins, cells and gene therapies, regenerative medicine. So we have a really good portfolio of projects that can already contribute to this initiative. You can find these projects listed on our website. And also to show the commitment of the European Commission to this new initiative, we have dedicated more than 108 million euro to further research into rare diseases in our last call for proposals that was issued in July and that closed very recently. We are currently in the middle of the evaluation of these projects. And we have a number of topics that have been open, notably one to support the logistics of this international initiative, a big effort in demonstrating the clinical utility of omics in rare diseases, including the setting up of databases, biobanks, and clinical bioinformatics hub for rare diseases. And also an aspect concentrated more on the preclinical and the clinical development of orphan drugs and observational studies in rare diseases, and also better management of rare diseases and best practice and knowledge sharing in that area. So all these projects that will start in 2012, so next year, will certainly contribute very much to this new initiative, and the European Commission is certainly committed to further inject money in that area. Of course, I think it's important to mention that industry is very welcome to participate in these calls for proposals, and there are certain topics which specifically request the participation of industry, and notably small and medium-sized enterprises at a certain minimum level of 30% budget in these projects. So the 30%, a minimum of 30% of the budget will be dedicated and sent to industry to develop these projects. So I really hope that this will convince you to participate in our activities and also to contribute to make this international initiative a success. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Catherine. Any question for Catherine? Yes, please, if you can introduce yourself.
Thank you. So maybe I can even... So you're from the European Commission, and I'm wondering whether you have colleagues around the world, let's say in Asia, for example, collaborating to this project, and how does it work in such a continent where there is no commission multi-country?
Well, thank you. Actually, I forgot to mention that we have already a number of funding bodies who are committed to this initiative, a number of funding agencies from Europe, but also from Canada, from US, and we have also interest from Asia, notably from China. They have not formally expressed their interest, but they are involved in the discussion, and we are looking forward, and also Japan is interested to participate. So it's not, you don't need to have a general organization such as ours here in Europe. In addition to the European Commission, in Europe you will have national agencies participating. And we will all discuss at the level of the executive committee to align our program. So that's how it will work. So you don't need to have a representation by part of the world, so from Asia or from South America, for instance, to participate in the consortium. The only necessary point is that you need to invest at least $10 million from 2010, and then the rest will be discussed at the level of the executive committee.
Thanks a lot, Catherine.